Buongiorno a tutti! Last week I asked my subscribers to share their Italian last names for a video dedicated to their authentic Italian pronunciation. And I've received hundreds of them. Fantastico! Now, here's the thing. Italian last names are commonly mispronounced in other countries, and that's totally normal and understandable. Other countries have different pronunciation systems and naturally apply those to any name. So in today's video, I will pronounce Italian last names in standard Italian and will explain the most common patterns and tricky aspects. Now, what if you don't have an Italian last name? Nessun problema. This video can still be very helpful to you as the pronunciation principles that we will cover today apply to many Italian words, so you can use them when speaking Italian. Ok, iniziamo. Let's begin. Let's begin with some extremely common mispronunciation patterns. Let's have a look at this first last name. This in Italian is carbone, carbone. But the common mistake here is to pronounce the ending E the English way, so with a E sound. Whereas in Italian, the ending E is pronounced as E, E. We never pronounce the English E as with an E sound because we have another vowel for that, and that's the I. So the I in Italian is pronounced as E, whereas the E in Italian is pronounced as E. Especially when it's the ending E, that's a closed E sound, like this, E, E. So this last name is not Carboni, which is a very common mistake, but is Carbone, Carbone. This pattern applies to all last names or Italian words that end in E. It's always E. Per esempio. Another last name, Monteforte, Monteforte. So as you can hear, it's not Monteforti, but it's Monteforte. So remember, whenever you have an ending E in Italian, it's pronounced as E. So if your last name ends with an E, make sure to pronounce it the Italian way, E. Perfetto. Now let's move on to another very common mispronunciation pattern. Let me show you this last name. Okay, this last name is probably mostly pronounced as Sciocca, Sciocca. But that's not correct because in Italian, the right way to pronounce this is Ciocca, Ciocca. So what's going on here? In Italian, the C is never ever pronounced as S. Why? Because we have another consonant for that, and that's the S. So the S is pronounced as S, whereas the C is pronounced in this case with a soft sound, which is ch, ch. So this name is Ciocca because of that. It's never Sciocca, it's Ciocca. If you have a C in your last name, and that C is followed by an E or an I, then you will need to pronounce it as a ch sound. Ciocca, Ciocca. Perfetto. Exact same pattern in this next last name. This is correctly pronounced as Ceravino, Ceravino. So it's not Seravino, it's Ceravino. If it were Seravino, it should have been spelled with the S in Italian. Instead, we have a C here and a soft C sound, so it's Ceravino. Now, this last name has an interesting story because what I've seen a lot with my students and people with Italian heritage is that not only the name was mispronounced, but sometimes the name actually changed its spelling because of the two different pronunciation systems. So probably when their ancestors arrived in another country, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in any other country, their last names started to get mispronounced or sometimes even misspelled based on the pronunciation system they were living in. So I think this will happen with this last name. This last name in Italy, it's not actually spelled that way, but it's spelled like this. 𝗟𝗏𝗏, 𝗟𝗏𝗏. So what's happening here is that we have a ton of vowels and they're pronounced differently. So I can see that probably when taking this last name from Italy to the English-speaking country, it got simplified and spelled in a way that made more sense for them. So like Seravino, Ceravino. Now, this is a very interesting last name because Ceravino is probably originally from Sicily. It has a last name that is probably originally from Sicily. And I can tell you that because in Sicilian, Ciara means to smell. Ciauro is smell in Sicilian, and vino is wine. So this last name actually has an interesting meaning, which is to smell the wine. That's probably the origin of the last name. But again, remember, even in this instance, the C is pronounced as C. So, Ciaravino. Va bene? Perfetto. Another example of this, of the C that's pronounced as S instead of Ch, is this last name. Now, I'm showing you this to really highlight that this mispronunciation pattern applies to any C in your name, or in any C in any Italian word. The C is never pronounced as S, regardless of where it's placed in the word. So in this case, we have a C in the middle of the name. Still, it's never S, it's a Ch sound. So this last name is Facciana. Facciana, not Faciana, but Facciana. Perfetto. Okay, let's move on to another last name that's actually very, very tricky. This last name I'm going to show you is a concentration of difficult Italian pronunciation points. Here it is. Let's take a little bit more space. Okay, now this last name in Italian is pronounced as Baiardo. Baiardo. And it can be very tricky. Why? Now, first of all, there are two A's. And in Italian, the A's are pretty different sound than in English. So I can imagine this being pronounced as Baiardo or something like that. In Italian, the A is always A. It's an open sound, a very open sound, like this, A. Now, here's the trick I use with all my students to help them pronounce the Italian A correctly. Think of being at the dentist. What do you do when you're at the dentist? That's exactly the movement and sound that you want to make to pronounce the Italian A, la A in Italiano, correctly. So think of many, many Italian words like mamma, donna, bella, casa. All those words have Italian A, and it's always very open and pronounced this way. So anytime you see an A in Italian, open up your mouth very well. Try that now. Try to say ba, ba, ba. Sounds different, right? That's the Italian A. Wherever you see an Italian A, remember to pronounce it like this. Okay, so this was the first tricky aspect. The second one is consecutive vowels. As you can see in this last name, we have 3 consecutive vowels, 3 vowels next to each other. Now, this is where Italian is very different from English, for example. In English, when you have 2 or more consecutive vowels, so vowels next to each other, you tend to make a sound that doesn't resemble any of them individually, but it's a different sound. In Italian, that never, ever happens. We always pronounce all vowels like we would if they were self-standing. So we always pronounce them the same way, one after the other. And this can take a little bit of time to train yourself to do, but it's crucial for correct Italian pronunciation. So here we have A, I, A. So the correct way to pronounce this is A, I, A. Aia. Now let's put everything together, the first part. Baia. So this is not baia or something like that. It's very clearly articulated as baia. Try that yourself. Baia. Okay. Another tricky aspect, I know you are waiting for that, it's the Italian R. Of course, The Italian R is pretty different from the English R. One of the main differences is this. When you make an English R, the placement, the movement that your mouth makes is different from the Italian one. So when you try to say R and try to be in English and try to be aware of how your mouth moves, where your tongue is placed. R. Now try to do this. Move your tongue a little bit more in front in your mouth. And that's the correct placement for the Italian R. So it's like R, R. My tongue is here, not here. This is one of the crucial aspects to get the Italian R correctly. Now, the Italian R is so different, we make it the tongue vibrate also, that it's really difficult to get this right the first time. So if you don't get this right the first time, don't worry. It takes time and practice, and it takes focused practice. Now, for example, with my students, I have 5 different exercises that I have them make to prepare to correctly pronounce the R, because those exercises train your mouth to make the sound correctly by moving your muscles and your face correctly. So, non ti preoccupare. Don't worry if you don't get this right from the first time. It's really hard. But from now on, just try to be aware of where you place your tongue when you make this sound. And try to move your tongue a little bit more in front of your mouth. So let's try this together. Baiar. Baiar. Perfetto. So take your time to practice this. Okay, so these were the 4 different points of pronunciation that we have in this word. So let's try to put everything together with the correct Italian pronunciation with this last name, which is Baiardo. Try it yourself. Baiardo. Molto bene. Now, one last thing about this name and any Italian word that appears to be more complex, and especially for Italian words that are longer, is this. One important trick is this. Take your time. Slow down. Take your time to articulate every single sound and especially every single vowel correctly, and you will have a really good Italian pronunciation. I know that many students feel feared to sound dumb when slowing down, but I promise you, you're not going to sound dumb. You're going to sound accurate. So slow down. Baiardo. Baiardo. You will be able to increase the speed over time after you practice the more complex words. Now, as you can see, behind a simple Italian last name or Italian word, there's a ton of pronunciation points that make it tricky to pronounce, especially if you are a native English speaker. That's exactly why I've created a comprehensive program to help you master Italian pronunciation. It's called the Italian Pronunciation Club, and it's finally going to be available next Tuesday. In this program, we will cover everything you need to master authentic Italian pronunciation and dramatically improve your listening and comprehension skills. So from mastering vowels to conquering the rolling R, from understanding stress patterns to perfecting consonant combinations, it will be all there in one step-by-step program. And to celebrate, I will be offering a special launch price of 30% off for the first 6 days only, starting next Tuesday, so stay tuned. For now, back to I cognomi italiani, Italian last names. Okay, the next few last names I have to show you are extremely interesting, not only for their pronunciation, but also for their meaning and history. Let me show you this one. Fornaro, Fornaro. Again, here the pronunciation point I want to make is to pronounce your A the Italian way. So this is not Fornaro, it's Fornaro. And 2 R's, so good practice. Fornaro. Now, what I want to highlight here is that when you have an Italian last name ending in aro, there are good chances that that name means a craft or a profession. So a lot of Italian last names ending in aro actually they have an actual meaning, which is the meaning of a profession. For example, fornaro is another version of the word fornaio in Italian, which means baker. So fornaro is essentially a baker. Another example of these, campanaro. So again, same ending, open up your A, campanaro. Perfetto. And that means bell ringer. So someone who rings the bell in a church. Another example of these, funaro. Funaro. So see how the I is always open? Ah, funaro. And this means rope maker. So of course, a lot of these last names have a very old origin and they talk about very old crafts and professions, but it's still very fascinating nowadays. One more example of these that's a little bit trickier for pronunciation is this one. Finocchiaro. Finocchiaro. This is very common in southern Italy, especially in Sicily. So what are the tricky point of this? The aro ending is clear, but here we have a double C that's followed by an H. And in Italian, that means hard sound. When you have a C or a G that's followed by an H, in Italian the sound is always hard, like k, k. No exceptions for this. So this is not finocchiaro or finocchiaro, it's finocchiaro. So if you have a double C in your last name followed by an H, you can be sure it's pronounced as k, finocchiaro. Perfetto. Okay, let's move on and let's have fun with some more complex Italian last names. And we're going to start probably from one of the hardest I have received. Here it is. This in Italian is sgrazzuti. Sgrazzuti. Now, the subscriber who sent this told me that in school, his teachers would just call him spaghetti. Now, I hope this wasn't intended as an offense, but instead the reason was that this last name is actually really hard to pronounce. I can see that someone who's not Italian confronting this last name may feel a little bit intimidated because it looks hard already. So let's see why this is so hard. First of all, we have a complex combination of consonants, which is SGR. So this is really hard to pronounce, probably even for Italian people. So this is sgr. Let's do with the sg, just the SG first, sg. And then there's the R, the Italian R, that we know it's complex. So this is sgr. Then we have the A, so let's put everything together. Sgra, sgra. Then another difficulty of this last name is a double Z, la doppia Z, which in Italian is pronounced as Z. So this is sgrazzuti, sgrazzuti. And I've received quite a few comments on the fact that pronouncing double Z is complex for non-native Italian speakers. I can see that, but I always have like a reference for my students when they find it difficult to pronounce. Think of pizza. La pizza. That's how we pronounce a double Z in Italian. And that can be a good reference, and Italian food can be helpful for Italian pronunciation, so let's use it. So remember, whenever you see a double Z in Italian, that's pronounced as Z. And since it's double, we keep it for longer. So this last name is correctly pronounced as sgrazzuti. Sgrazzuti. Perfetto. Now let's have a look at more Italian last names that have the double Z pattern. Per esempio, this is the same thing. Terlizzi. Terlizzi. Va bene? Another one. Mazzeo. Mazzeo. This also has consecutive vowels, so never forget what I told you. Always pronounce every single vowel. This is not Mazzio or something like that. It's Mazzeo. Perfetto. Now, double consonants are very common in Italian, and they are very common not only in words, but also in last names. So let's see a few more with double consonants, because chances are that you may have one double consonant pattern in your last name. Per esempio, this last name. This I can imagine being mispronounced in two ways. One, the C, but by now you know it. So remember, this is not Mancinelli, it's Manci, Manci. So the C is ch. The second is the double L. So I can imagine this being pronounced as Mancinelli or something like that. Instead, we have two L's and we need to pronounce both of them. How do we do that? By elongating the sound. That's the trick to correct double consonant pronunciation in Italian. Just make the same sound, but keep it for longer. And this applies to any double consonant. So this is correctly pronounced as Mancinelli, Mancinelli. Now we have a lot of double L's in Italian last names. For example, Orselli, Orselli, again double L. Another one, okay, Fiorillo, Fiorillo. So another double L ending. So if you have the double L ending, pronounce both L's. Now this last name has an interesting meaning because this actually means little flower. It's a variation of Italian because this is very common in the Naples area. So Napoli and Campania, the region of Naples. And this illo ending, so I-L-L-O, is very common of the area because that's a common ending for words of the Neapolitan dialect, dialetto napoletano. Per esempio, many last names end in illo in that area. For example, the famous pizza maker Sorbillo is another example, or even actual words. Like, for example, the Neapolitan word for a child, which in Italian is bambino, in Neapolitan is piccirillo, piccirillo. So this illo ending is very common in the Naples area. And remember, just pronounce both of the L's. Okay, I have one more last name that can be very difficult to pronounce because we have said so far for double consonants. So here it is. This in Italian is pronounced as muffoletto, muffoletto. So this is hard because it has not one pair but two pairs of double consonants, so double F and double T. Again, what I've told you so far applies to any double consonant, so just keep the sound for longer. This is not muffoletto, it's muffoletto, muffoletto. Can you hear how I'm keeping the F and the T for longer? That's the trick. Molto bene. That's a wrap for today. I hope you enjoyed learning the authentic Italian pronunciation of these beautiful Italian last names. Now, I received so many that it would be impossible to include all of them in today's video. So guess what? I've decided to make another video, so I will be back next week with part 2, featuring more Italian last names that you submitted. So make sure you are subscribed so you won't miss it. And remember that the Italian Pronunciation Club, my comprehensive program to learn Italian pronunciation, will be available next Tuesday with a special 30% off launch price for the first 6 days only. So if you want to master Italian pronunciation once and for all, this is your chance. Noi ci vediamo la prossima settimana. See you next week. Ciao ciao!